Putin's ports are on fire, ships are at the bottom. Belarus and Russia have begun their worthless but provocative exercises. Trump doesn't see a mistake, but he'll have to act against the Kremlin. We will tell and show the main news of the day here and now. This is the program, 20 minutes. I am Iryna Uzlova. The new reality sounds great in the St. Petersburg backstreet and area. Smoke to the sky, explosions worth millions in Putin's very lair in his small homeland in the Leningrad region. SBU drones hit the key export hub of the Russian Federation, the Port of Primorsk. It was responsible for loading the shadow fleet used by the Russian Federation to bypass international sanctions. This night, drones of the Ukrainian Security Service hit the largest Russian oil port on the Baltic Sea, which is the final point of the Baltic Pipeline System. According to our sources in the special service, Primorsk is a key hub for loading the so-called shadow fleet of the Russian Federation, with the help of which the country circumvents international sanctions and sells oil on foreign markets through the port. About 60 million tons of oil passed annually, which brings Russia about $15 billion. According to the interlocutors, as a result of a successful drone attack on the SBU, fires broke out on one of the ships, the port, and at the pumping station. Oil shipments have been suspended. According to Putin's wallet, the arrival is also normal. The estimated daily losses of the Russian budget from the cessation of exports may amount to up to $41 million. It is also noted that the SBU forces hit a number of oil pumping stations of the Russian Federation, PS3, Andreapol PS and PS7. They are key elements of the trunk pipeline system that ensures the supply of crude oil to the port terminal service. Governor Sasha Drozdenko of the Leningrad region reported numerous attacks by 20, 30, or more unmanned aircraft. St. Petersburg's Pulkovo airport was closed and no one flew anywhere. Here are the sanctions in the name of our special services.
The SBU was the first to systematically introduce so-called drone sanctions against the Russian oil industry. They block the flow of petrodollars to the aggressor's budget. And since the Russian economy is based on oil, each so-called cotton hits their ability to fight against our state. These sanctions will continue until a just peace comes to Ukraine.
By the way, September is becoming just a black month for Putin's ports. And it is obvious that the ship that was hit by a Ukrainian drone near Novorossiysk on September 10 is the Russian Spasotel Ilyin, which was built in our illegally occupied Crimea. This opinion was expressed by the head of the Institute of Black Sea and Strategic Studies, Andriy Klimenko. I am almost sure that on September 10, 2025, the Spasotel Ilyin was hit, Klimenko said. According to him, the rescue vessel Spasotel Ilyin of the MPSV-07 project was laid down in Crimea in occupied Kerch on July 28, 2015. The vessel was launched on February 21, 2019. According to Klimenko, it was completed afloat near the wall of the Zaliv plant. The ship, built for the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, seemingly failed to aid the rescuer. On September 10, Ukrainian special forces struck a Russian Black Sea Fleet ship near Novorossiysk with a drone. The main intelligence directorate reports a $60 million MPSV-07 ship was hit. During the attack, the ship was conducting electronic reconnaissance and patrolling near Novorossiysk Bay, where remnants of the Russian Black Sea Fleet are based. The main intelligence directorate reported the vessel was commissioned in 2015. A merry night was also spent in Moscow. Sergei Sobyanin, the mayor of Russia's capital, said air defense shot down 9 drones heading to Moscow. What an entertaining arithmetic from life Russians have now. The monitoring channel Radar.ru claimed that the drones were shot down in the area of the Kubinka air base. The Shot News channel indirectly confirmed this, stating explosions were heard by residents of Odintsovo. Alarming events in the Smolensk region. Who is to blame for them smoking at night? wherever it happens or doesn't. On the night of September 12, drones attacked the Smolensk region. Governor Vasya Anakin complained. He attached pictures and warned about the work of air defense and urged people not to film it and move away from the windows. The Russians filmed everything correctly and posted it. Loud explosions are heard, and the video authors frequently swear. It's strange what it is, but they should be happy. In a video published by the Exilanova_plus Telegram channel, local residents reported that drones were falling directly on Lukoil and offered to maybe at least to close the window, otherwise suddenly it would fall on Lukoil now. Yes, right at Lukoil. Look, said the woman, smoking on the balcony. According to the OSIN channel, Cyberboroshno, the Kardamov oil depot in the Smolensk region was hit. At least 2 hits fell there, analysts write. Rosatom claimed that Ukrainian armed forces drones allegedly attacked the Smolensk nuclear power plant's operating power unit. They chose not to escalate, noting the drone attack didn't impact nuclear plant safety, only breaking a few auxiliary room windows. Almost 100 drones were shot down over the Bryansk region by Governor Sasha Bogomaz. It was also restless in the Belgorod region. Governor Gladkov complained about real problems, serious, and says, attacks without end, schools, distance learning. It is better not to go to kindergartens and sit still. So why do you need this study? The main thing is that Putin is prolonging the war. In total, on the night of September 12, the Russian Ministry of Defense shot down 221 Ukrainian drones, most of all, in the Bryansk, Smolensk, and Leningrad regions. Russia's Ministry of Defense confirmed 85 Ukrainian drones were downed in Bryansk on September 12 night. Over the Smolensk region, Russian air defense tried to destroy 42, over the Leningrad region, 28 drones. Also under attack were Kaluga, allegedly shot down 18 drones, Novgorod, 14, Oriel and Moscow shot down 9 each, Belgorod, 7, Rostov and Tver regions fought with 3. The Russians allegedly shot down 1 drone each over the Pskov, Tula, and Kursk regions. The airports of Pskov, Ivanovo, and Yaroslavl closed, reported by the Federal Air Transport Agency, and military expert Roman Svitin speaks about the effectiveness of the attack on the port of Primorsk and Smolensk on our air.
Smolensk is one of these facilities. The Lukoilov enterprises there are quite large. They are starting oil refining, transshipment and oil depots, including oil depots. It has already been hit, that is, this is a second strike. In principle, a synergistic effect of the accumulation of errors, the accumulation of disabled facilities, it will eventually give its results. They avenged the Poles, our Polish brothers. The Russians tried to go to Russia to somehow scare Polish society, and we have already completed the combat mission. They frightened them so, quite well, especially in this very direction, that is, the northwest of the Russian Federation. The Russians have 4 ports in the European part of Russia that need to be constantly worked out. Oil transshipment, gas transshipment, this Novorossiysk is one of the largest. Nearby is Tuapse, a little smaller, where the Tuapse oil refinery mainly works. And in the northwest, in the area of St. Petersburg, there is Ust-Luga south of St. Petersburg, north of St. Petersburg, this is Primorsk. We have repeatedly talked about these ports. We finally got to Primorsk. We used to get to Ust-Luga. Now we have already reached Primorsk, and it is from there that the main pipes of oil pipelines enter Primorsk. That is, it is mainly in Primorsk that those tankers of the Dark Fleet, the so-called, most likely, which we have just hit, one of the tankers are loaded there. That is, either one of the ships begins to smoke there.
Putin's war subjects won't live happily, as Ukraine's armed forces destroyed the occupiers' command post, leading to top officers becoming casualties. On August 30th, the armed forces of Ukraine defeated the command post of the occupiers' army in the village of Voskresenka, Zaporizhia region. Now the first fat losses of the invaders have been confirmed. According to Anatoly Stefan Sterlitz, an officer of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, a military blogger who tracks the losses of the occupiers on the battlefield, at least 2 lieutenant colonels of the Russian army were killed as a result of the strike on the command post. Obituaries about these occupiers of the senior officers appeared a few days after the defeat of the command post. Sterlitz claims that both lieutenant colonels were liquidated in Voskresenka. The deaths of Lieutenant Colonels Dmitry Pashabaykov Shigabudzinov and Ruslan Shigabudzinov have been confirmed. In total, 17 officers and 1 soldier from the Russian Federation were eliminated while leading an offensive in one front sector. It might have been a mistake. American leader Donald Trump seems oblivious to the situation. The US president suggested Russian drones might have mistakenly ended up in Poland. Trump's September 11th video commentary was published by Polish RP24 correspondent Marek Walkuski in the White House. Trump's initial comment on the event was quite laconic. His message on the social network Truth Social consisted of 2 sentences. "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." And, "Oh my." Instead of a powerful retaliatory strike against the Kremlin and Putin, Trump assessed the situation in such a way that he again left the Russian dictator a window for excuses.
How do you react to the fact that a Russian drone flew into Poland? This could have been a mistake. It could have been a mistake. Despite all this, I am unhappy with what is related to this whole situation. I hope it will all end.
Yes, it would be better if it were a mistake, but the reality, alas, is such that there is no room for doubt, purposefulness, and strike. Example, Polish Minister Donald Tusk noted that the flight of Russian drones into Polish airspace was not a mistake. We would also like the drone attack on Poland to be a mistake, but it is not. And we know this, Tusk-based. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski, who is visiting the Ukrainian capital today, also said that the Russian drones over his side were not a mistake, as Trump suggests. At night, when 19 drones flew over Poland, 100 of them and more than 40 missiles flew over Ukraine. No, it was not a mistake, Sikorski noted. Poland's chief diplomat criticized Trump's indecisiveness on Russia, saying Alaska was received instead of sanctions. Sikorski believes that Russia should be deprived of the resources necessary to continue the war against Ukraine. US President Donald Trump was supposed to impose tough sanctions against Russia, but instead he arranged a summit for Russian MP Putin in Alaska, Radosław Sikorski said on Fox News.
We must change Vladimir Putin's calculations. We must convince him that he cannot conquer Ukraine at an acceptable cost. And for this, we need to impose tougher sanctions against Russia. Russia must be deprived of the resources necessary to continue the war against Ukraine. We were supposed to get sanctions, but instead we got Alaska. And since then, as you said, the attacks have intensified.
The Russian drone attack on Poland was planned and there is all the evidence of this, said Deputy Prime Minister of Digitalization of Poland Krzysztof Górkowski. He noted that this is invested in an even wider field of Putin's provocations.
Russia deliberately attacked Poland. We have facts and evidence that support this. It was a planned provocation coordinated with a disinformation campaign. Every word that undermines the fact that we were dealing with a deliberate attack supports Russian disinformation. Disinformation is also an element of war.
However, in an interview with Fox News this afternoon, Trump was asked what he was going to do in relation to Putin, since Russian drones had already invaded Poland, in particular, whether sanctions could be imposed. "I'm not going to protect anyone. The drones were shot down and fell in one of the areas, but it still shouldn't approach Poland in any case," the American leader replied briefly. He's annoyed by Putin and considering sanctions. Yes, the Kremlin's attack on Poland was deliberate, agrees Viktor Savinyuk, an assistant at the Institute of International Relations at the Maria Curie Skłodowska University in Lublin. "It is clear who is to blame, but what to do?" Savinyuk and I thought together.
In Poland, a rare unity was achieved between President Karol Nawrocki and the government of Donald Tusk. All key figures began to speak with one voice, calling the attacks a deliberate Russian provocation and demanding a NATO response. The alliance reacted by stressing that Poland was not left alone. Nawrocki also contacted Donald Trump and assured of constant contact with the United States. There are also positive aspects in Polish-Ukrainian cooperation. Donald Tusk said that he is considering the possibility of sending Polish specialists for training in Ukraine to combat drones. And Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski arrived in Kyiv for consultations with his British counterpart and Ukrainian officials. This confirms active communications and Warsaw's desire to strengthen its defenses.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki announced 21 Russian drones entered Poland, with some still undetected. The president of Poland's advisor on international affairs, Marcin Przydacz, stated this. The number of registered Russian drones that flew into Polish airspace has increased to 21, Przydacz said. As of last night, the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs confirmed the detection of 17 drones. The Polish president's advisor warned against the mistaken view that the drones might be Ukrainian. He claims it is a Russian disinformation company. He also added that the Polish authorities clearly stated that all the drones detected were Russian and launched from Russian territory. Of course, the drones were Putin's. We sought insights from military analyst Yang Matveev on NATO countries' drone interception rates.
As for how it goes astray, there are questions. Therefore, maybe they decided so, but again, this is only my assumption, but even if such a decision was made, it is quite reckless, because we know that these drones may have warheads too. And, in fact, as this situation showed, there is a photo of the destroyed house. It's not clear, it's just that a drone fell there, some anti-aircraft missile fell there by accident. The wreckage of not Gerbera, but a full-fledged Shahed drone fell there. Unknown. But, nevertheless, there is one destroyed house. If there were people in the place of destruction, the person would clearly be injured or killed. Here is a direct threat. And the fact that these drones really flew so far into Poland, of course, and the fact that they were allowed, shows that Poland in particular and NATO defense in general are not ready to counteract. They showed how NATO would act in such a situation. And if tomorrow instead of 20 Gerbers, 20 full-fledged Shaheds fly to the same ratio. And they are more complex, they are more stable in the air. They have a longer range. They can fly, they can hit, they can blow something up. And what happens? In the same way, NATO will come out and say, yes, of course, we are concerned, this is all bad, but we will come up with some kind of answer. And Putin or Zakharova will come out and say, this is not our drone, and how can you prove?
Russia's strike on Poland tested NATO countries' political and physical responses. Ukrainian President Zelensky noted that Russian drone attacks on Poland and the deployment of troops to Crimea are psychologically similar, during a briefing with Finnish President Stubb. Russia might attack Poland to prevent Ukraine from receiving air defense systems from partners before winter, given the possibility of repeated strikes. It's so similar to the Russian dictator Putin. This attack is psychologically similar to Crimea. We are in a technological war, not requiring soldiers in green uniforms. Today, the war has changed, with Russian-made drones playing a role in Poland, noted the Ukrainian president. Political strategist Mikhail Shitelman agrees and will speak.
It will not start in one day, just as it did not start in one day against Ukraine, where we were for 8 years before the war escalated into a full-scale one. After all started with some green men in Crimea, and if they had been killed by the defense forces of Ukraine, then there would have been no seizure of Crimea, but no, they were left to live. Armed people, illegally present, stood in Ukrainian cities without clear grounds. And then they did not dare to kill them, and therefore part of Ukraine was occupied, and therefore all this escalated into a full-scale war. Today we see exactly the same thing. The drones that flew into Poland are the bombing of Poland, and no one dared to retaliate. That is, there was no retaliatory strike on the territory of the Russian Federation, although this is accepted in all international practice loved by countries. Any country responds to strikes on its territory. You see, when Pakistan hit India, India hit back at Pakistan. When Israel hit Iran, Iran hit Israel. When, on the contrary, Yemen struck Israel, Israel struck Yemen. It is always symmetrical. And only Poland, NATO in this case, of course, for some reason did not retaliate against the territory of the Russian Federation. This is inexplicable, or rather, can only be explained by cowardice.
They have previously tested the West's reaction and threatened with provocations by Russia and Belarus, as seen today in the joint exercises Zapad 2025 in Belarus. They are held, as a rule, during peak periods of aggravation of relations with NATO. Zapad 1999 was Russia's response to the US and NATO's Allied force operation against Yugoslavia during the Kosovo War, The exercises warned the alliance not to interfere with Russia's actions in Chechnya. Zapad 2009 occurred after the 2008 Russian-Georgian War, for which Putin was forgiven, and so Moscow again sent warnings to the West not to interfere with it in the post-Soviet space. And during the 2013 exercises, actions were worked out to prepare Russia for aggression against Ukraine. On the eve of invading Ukraine, during the Zapad 2021 exercises, Russia simulated a strategic offensive to enter Kaliningrad and occupy the Baltic countries and part of Poland. Ukraine's efforts to regain Crimea and offensive actions against Ukraine, backed by the US and NATO, were repelled. This year, the legend of the exercises is more defensive in nature, only with some elements of offensive actions. The conditional enemy executes provocations, sabotage, cyber attacks, and attempts to invade Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad region. This leads to a local conflict according to the scenario. And then Russia and Belarus carry out operations to localize, block and destroy illegal armed groups. It is also planned to work out planning for the use of the Oreshnik nuclear and missile system during the exercises. This sends a signal to the West, including on nuclear and hypersonic weapons, including Belarus in this track, in particular, as a continuation of the projection of Russian right-wing political power to the West, as well as the creation of security and an information curtain, keeping in suspense, says Yang Avsiashkin, an analyst of the iSense project, in a comment to RBC Ukraine. These differences from past years relate to military and political issues. Fewer Russian troops arrived in Belarus than in previous exercises. Almost all combat-ready units are fighting against Ukraine. In addition, the Trump factor plays a role. The US president did not visibly react to the Shah's flight to Poland. Systematic actions during the exercise are different. This shows force against the US and NATO. But Russia is not afraid to strain relations with the West very much now, because this could push Trump to impose additional sanctions. The exercises are smaller in scale and far from Europe's borders, according to retired Colonel Serhiy Mishchenko, former deputy director of the main intelligence directorate's information department, as reported by RBC Ukraine. He claims Moscow can't amass enough forces to attack the Baltic states and Poland in a few years, even if it ends the war against Ukraine. Russia's economic crisis limits resources for armed forces restoration. During the Zapad 2025 exercises, Poland deployed 40,000 troops to the Belarusian border, closed it, and halted air traffic. Despite doubts about NATO's combat readiness after only downing for Shah drones, the deterrent potential against Russia remains. Moreover, there is a powerful concentration of American troops and bases in Poland. Yang Avsiashkin noted that Russia's inability to send more troops to Minsk is used to portray it as a constructive, predictable partner or negotiable counterparty amidst efforts to establish Western contacts. In recent months, two special representatives of the US president have visited Belarus at once, Keith Kellogg and John Cole. During visits, Lukashenko released political prisoners twice, totaling 66 people. On September 11th, the US lifted sanctions against Belavia, a Belarusian state-owned company. Poland's situation shows Trump still tolerates aggressors, reasons unclear, but the reaction of other NATO members gives more reason for optimism. Great Britain is considering strengthening Poland's air defense with European NATO members' involvement. Russia's actions in one way or another push the alliance to unite a tougher stance towards Russia, and even to help Ukraine, in particular in the field of air defense, experts say. We are white and fluffy, we don't attack anyone, we train quietly for ourselves, Dmitry Peskov preemptively justifies.
Of course, such exercises always attract the attention of border countries. In normal conditions of constructive, peaceful and friendly coexistence, representatives of neighboring countries always have the opportunity to observe these exercises. There was such a practice. All this was practiced. Now, when Western Europe takes a hostile position towards us, naturally, all this results in such emotional overloads for these people. I want to remind you of the words of our president. Russia has never threatened anyone, nor does it threaten the countries of Europe. It was not Russia that moved towards Europe with its military infrastructure. And Europe.
In general, peace in Ukraine is hindered by malicious Europeans. So we would have ended all wars a long time ago, says Dmitry. Peskov stated there is now reportedly a pause in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, though communication channels remain open. Russia again blamed others for delaying the war's end and talks termination. This time, Peskov blamed the Europeans. He claims Europe interferes with Ukraine's peace efforts. He said you can't expect quick results with rose-colored glasses. Of course, you can't, because you are not going to stop the war at all. Europeans are pushing Russia towards just peace. EU countries have extended sanctions on Moscow for the war with Ukraine and are preparing a stricter Package 19, according to expert Maxim Gardis. EU countries have agreed to extend sanctions against Russia for 6 months due to the war against Ukraine, stated EU diplomat Kaja Kallas. She said the EU is finalizing the 19th package of measures, considering further restrictions on Russian oil sales, shadow oil tankers, and banks. Kallas said they will block Putin's war from money access. Britain is more distant and painful for Russia. New sanctions target Russia's shadow fleet. Companies supplying electronics for Russian weapons faced restrictions. The UK is increasing pressure on Putin's regime by sanctioning hundreds of individuals and entities to reduce Russian army revenues and supplies. The British government website states sanctions target 70 ships of Russia's shadow fleet. These ships carry Russian oil and are key suppliers of military components. The UK leads globally in sanctioning Russian oil tankers. These measures were applied during British Foreign Secretary Ward Cooper's trip to Ukraine. Vital international action to increase economic pressure on Russia and cut off the critical cash flows that Putin desperately needs to pay for his illegal war. That's what we are doing, Cooper said. Sanctions target 30 individuals and entities for aiding the Russian military with electronics, chemicals, and explosives. These elements are used to produce missiles and other weapons systems. By the way, in addition to the new British Foreign Secretary Ward Cooper, Prince Harry unexpectedly arrived in Kiev with an unannounced visit. He visited Ukraine upon government invitation to help restore thousands of servicemen wounded in the war. During a trip to Kiev, he and his Invictus Games Foundation team plan to discuss new rehabilitation support initiatives for the wounded. Cooper will announce £142 million, $193 million, in winter support for Ukraine, Reuters reported. Cooper met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other senior Ukrainian officials. Japan is also in business and is hitting Russia with additional sanctions, lowering the price ceiling for Russian oil by $13 per barrel. The Japanese authorities have decided to tighten sanctions against Russia and reduce the price cap for Russian oil from $60 to $47.60 per barrel, like Europe, said the country's chief cabinet secretary Yoshimasa Hayashi. Japan has imposed asset freezes and export restrictions on Russian companies and those of some other countries. The new sanctions start today, September 12, to pressure Russia over its war in Ukraine. The United States continues to urge global pressure on Russia, despite being cautious with direct Kremlin pressure. Hungary and Slovakia should still abandon Russian energy resources, Trump's representative urges, realizing that the more Russia's ability to finance the war against Ukraine, the better for everyone. U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright urged EU buyers to stop purchasing Russian fuel and buy from the U.S. instead. A U.S. official in Brussels met with officials to discuss how to increase imports of American liquefied gas and cut off Russia's financing of the war, writes Politico. Wright stated that unchanged EU gas laws will hinder importing U.S. liquefied gas. The official said it would be preferable for Europe to receive supplies from friends. Asked if Hungary and Slovakia should end relations with the Kremlin, Wright replied absolutely.
We want to completely displace Russian gas. US President Donald Trump and all EU countries, we want to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The more we can limit Russia's ability to finance this deadly war, the better for all of us. Therefore, the answer to your question is absolutely.
At the same time, Wright also called on European countries to find alternatives to Russian nuclear energy, saying we want nuclear technology to come from the United States or the EU itself. Sanctions will end Putin, whose finances are in dire straits. Doctor of Economics, Professor Igor Vladimirovich Lipsitz assessed the Russian economy on our air.
From the point of view of money, everything is very bad, but there are still people in Russia, there are a lot of superfluous people, no one needs them, and they continue to go. I don't know how accurate this is, but so far there is information that every month about 1,000 people sign contracts, that is, this is some kind of replenishment, and this, of course, is such a large part of the Russian armed forces now. In fact, during the war, Russia switched from a conscript army, strictly speaking, to a contract, mercenary army, which was previously considered impossible, but which is already very expensive for Russia and greatly increases the budget deficit, that is, this is already a very burdensome story. According to estimates, about 2 trillion rubles are now coming for these payments, which is quite a large amount even for Russia. So in this sense, Russia is also trying to find people who are ready to fight. It also has some kind of military equipment, that is, what is called to arrange another short provocation that brings confusion to the European Union, will bring confusion to NATO. They can probably try, but for a long war, of course, they no longer have the resources.
And the recognition of Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism can completely destroy the Russian financial system. Therefore, Senator Lindsey Graham called on the world to get its ass up and destroy Putin. U.S. Senators Lindsey Graham, Richard Blumenthal, and Amy Klobuchar introduced a bill labeling Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism until it returns all kidnapped Ukrainian children. According to the bill, Russia has abducted 19,546 Ukrainian children and trains teenagers to fight.
I call on the world to get its ass up and make it unacceptable. And we promise to make those senators who will vote against this bill famous. What does it mean to be a state sponsor of terrorism under US law? Your economy is radioactive. You do business with Russia at your own risk. We have laws that punish state sponsors of terrorism. It is not easy to get on this list. But, let me say, Russia has earned the right to be on this list. Therefore, today we will present our bill. We will ask the leaders of both parties to give us a chance to discuss it and vote.
In addition, the senator stressed that US President Donald Trump is very determined to make China pay for supporting Russia. The justice of punishment consists in punishing crimes to the extent that they harm society. Montesquieu. Iryna Uzlova, our program, 20 minutes. Subscribe to Channel 24 YouTube, put your likes and comments. See you on Tuesday. Join our other YouTube projects and programs. Take care, see you and win.